Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. I think we're going to get started. All right, great. So I think as you've all figured out, things are going 30 minutes behind today because of the fire alarm. So we're starting at 11:30 and finishing at 1. Anyway, good morning or good evening wherever you're calling from. Thanks for coming and thanks for using your time to come and discuss this important topic. I'm Guy De Silva. I'm with WWF US on our corporate water stewardship team. So I work with US companies on water stewardship towards the grand aim of improving the basins and the watersheds where companies source and operate from. So 2 months ago, I, with the team, we went to Pakistan for a project led by WWF Pakistan, supported by Coca-Cola. And I'm not like a master stakeholder convener by any means, but we went there to collect information from the stakeholders. It was my first time in the field after a long time because of COVID. But we went there, we did some desktop research. We thought we had a pretty clear idea of like what the problem was, what was needed, climate resilience, implement MBS here and there. But when we came out of those stakeholder workshops, just by talking to a few people, we came out with a pretty different picture of like what the problem was, a much more nuanced, a much more deep picture. And people simply told us, we just need you to help us coordinate better. So that was like a small anecdote and a good reminder for me about like the value of stakeholder engagement. Sometimes it's a bit of a vague, maybe a bit of a messy concept, especially for companies. So we hope today to kind of try and demystify that. So as you can see, the purpose of this session is on companies and stakeholder engagement. Maybe some of you in the audience are familiar with this sort of work, but for some of you, again, it might be a bit of like a concept that carries a lot of uncertainty. What we aim to do in this session is to bring in some kind of practical, kind of real world experience and have a discussion about what it's actually like. So we're not going to get into technical step-by-step guidance on how you do stakeholder engagement, because there's plenty of guidance out there. AWS, for one, has guidance on this. We're just going to kind of trade a few, anecdotes and stories to kind of bring it to life. A lot of frameworks ask for stakeholder engagement. What is it actually like, and how does it actually feel? So pretty straightforward agenda. I'm going to give a quick introduction of why we're covering this topic, but the meat of it is going to be with the panel who are going to cover, the what's it like. Hopefully, if the members of the private sector industry, we can get companies to kind of get over the fear or embrace the uncertainty of stakeholder engagement, because the rewards are as we'll hopefully demonstrate, worth it. And then we'll have a bit of audience Q&A, both online and offline, and if there's time, a quick breakout exercise. Firstly, I think I should address the theme of this conference, which is innovative solutions for a water-wise world. So when you all think of innovative solutions, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For me, it's mainly technology. If you think innovative solution, I normally the first thing I think about is technology, like new irrigation systems or like machine learning or AI. And these are, of course, super important, crucial, and water carries a lot of technical challenges. But I would argue that water is not just a technical problem; it's a systems problem as well. And if we're in the business of trying to improve whole watersheds or catchments or basins, that means getting a lot of different people to work together, and that requires systems change, which starts with stakeholder engagement. So, we not only need innovative technical solutions, and that this was sort of alluded to, I think, yesterday at the governance session for whoever was there for that. But we don't only need technical solutions, we also need to find innovative ways to engage and work with each other. All right. So we're talking in this session about stakeholder engagement in the context of water stewardship specifically. So this is mainly about companies engaging stakeholders in their basins as part of their water stewardship programs. A couple of organizations, there are a handful of organizations, each have their own definitions of water stewardship, and I would say they're all pretty aligned. I've stolen AWS's over here, and I'm not going to read it, but the point is, explicitly or implicitly, water stewardship is a stakeholder inclusive process, and therefore stakeholder engagement is a critical piece of any water stewardship program. Naturally, this means that, all the many guidances, frameworks, global credible frameworks that are out there require or ask for stakeholder engagement. AWS, for one, asks for stakeholder engagement on collecting information on local context and catchments. Most recently, science-based targets, which was launched in May, they asked for stakeholder engagement on collecting information on local models for target setting. There are other programs and platforms like the Water Resilience Coalition or water funds, and all of those require or involve some form of stakeholder engagement. So, a lot of frameworks ask for this. So I guess the companies maybe like, okay, that's good that I have to do that, but like, what is it actually? What is it actually like? How is it just a tick boxing exercise? Is it scary? Is it, why would I put myself completely out there? What is the value of it? Especially because often there's not as many KPIs and things like that associated with it. Why would a company put themselves out there? So I'm going to invite our panel to stage. Excuse my flappy papers. To have a quick discussion on that. We've got Scott McCready from AWS, Jan Berger from Coca-Cola, and Margot Conover from General Mills. And yeah, we hope to kind of, as I said, demystify this concept of stakeholder engagement by bringing in some personal experiences. Is it worth it? What if things don't go to plan? These are things we hope to discuss. So thanks for agreeing to speak. I really appreciate it. And my first question, which is not really a question, is please introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your programs and the role of stakeholder engagement in your programs. So you can go first, Scott.
Hi. God, that's loud, isn't it? I'm Scott McCready. I'm Chief Strategy Officer for the Alliance for Water Stewardship. For anyone who doesn't know, AWS, we are two things. We are a sustainability standard system for water, so a bit like Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance or FSC. And we're also an alliance. We are a network of membership alliance of about 170 organisations, transnational corporations, international NGOs, consultancies, water experts, development agencies, etc. In terms of stakeholder engagement, as Guyans alluded to, our standard kind of requires and guides companies to do stakeholder engagement. It's a little bit more complicated than this, but broadly speaking, if anybody asks how you use the standard, it's split into, there is kind of stuff which is technical that you need to do, which is kind of like on-site water management and kind of engaging with catchment data, etc., etc. And the second part is talking to people. Sort of like identifying people, going talking to them, validating listening to what they're saying, making plans, validating kind of like what you're doing with those people.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Margot Conover and I lead our global water impact strategy at General Mills. General Mills is a food company, but guys have probably eaten some of our products like Cheerios and Nature Valley bars or Haagen-Dazs here in Europe. And as a food company, water is super critical to our business. You can't grow plants without water, and if you can't grow plants, then you can't buy ingredients to make food out of it. And then for us, since we're a global company with over 100 brands selling all over the world, we also have a very large presence in sourcing regions around the world, and those are often very diffuse watershed areas where there's lots of users, lots of communities, lots of ecosystems represented, and we just can't do anything there without doing stakeholder consultation. We need that to understand what the context is, and then find collaborators that can help us support our impact goals and support resilience in that region. And then the way that we often think about it is that even if General Mills were to do everything perfect in our own supply chain, our own facilities, it doesn't really matter if nobody else is doing anything in that watershed. So we need to get on the same page with others, understand what they care about, understand what their goals are, and figure out how we can collaborate together in order to achieve that. And so that's how we think about stakeholder engagement and how it can fit into our water program.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jan Burger. I'm a Climate and Water Sustainability Director for Coca-Cola in Europe. For Coca-Cola, of course, water is very close to our heart. Without water, no Coca-Cola, right? So everybody can understand why we think water is very important. So that's why we are taking action already for quite a while to address water for not only our operations, also for our ingredients coming from agriculture, but also for our communities that sometimes don't have access to safe water. And working on water in many places in the world, together with WWF, for instance, we have a commitment to replenish 100% of the water that we use in our products globally. And in our new 2030 water strategy, we are really now focusing on the local context. So meaning the local watersheds to create the impact. But as Margot already said, we can only do so much together. But if you want to create impact, you need to find bystanders, you need to have collective action. And for collective action, you need to manage the stakeholders or engage your stakeholders. And those stakeholders can be very diverse. They can be farmers, can be local communities, local societies, governments, river authorities, for instance. So, yeah, there is quite a lot of effort to be done to create this collective action at the watershed level.
All right, great. Yeah, y'all can hold on to the mic. So I'm going to start with you, Margot, because we spoke about some examples before. So, can you describe the initial process in more practical terms? Like, say, you've chosen your basins, you're going to that basin now, you establish that you need to speak to some people. How do you actually, what's the first step? You send some emails, make some calls, go to hand out flyers for a stakeholder workshop. What's it actually like, the first bit?
Yeah, so I think for us, the way we typically approach it is there's 3 groups that can often help us get connected better to the communities or to the practitioners that they work most closely with. So it can be local NGOs, researchers, and then industry groups that could either be connected to our sourcing supply chain or to peers that are working in the region. And we kind of set up calls with them to share what our priorities are, share what some of our ideas are, but also really primarily to learn from them and to see what do they think is needed, what is the gaps that are preventing action now, and then also who else do they think we should talk to in order to really understand what's going on. And then one thing I think is super important to know is it's not a one-off thing, it's like establishing a relationship with people that are present in that community and working consistently to understand where each other are coming from. So an example where we've done that was in California. That's a priority supply shed for us because we source about 50 ingredients from the Central Valley there. The biggest 3 are almonds, rice, and processing tomatoes. We had some cool insights from a regenerative agriculture project that we did in Kansas that regenerative agriculture could potentially have really cool outcomes for water resilience and water quality benefits. And we thought, California needs help with both of those. Maybe it will work here. So we started to do some stakeholder engagement to understand where there was potential, and we were kind of met with the whole spectrum from enthusiasm to no way in hell is that going to work here. But through that process of trying to understand and glean what people needed and the insights from the community, we went in a pretty different direction with the work that we started to do than we probably would have if we didn't do that. So if we hadn't engaged those folks, we probably would have gone in with a program that looked a lot like our work in other regions, so coaching farmers on specific principles, implementing that right away. But what we heard was actually needed was research that could show how regenerative agriculture influenced water balance on almond orchards. So that's what we decided to do, was fund a project on that with the University of California, Davis. And we never would have thought to do that if we hadn't engaged those folks.
Awesome. Yeah, a quick follow-up on that, like just about the experience, I guess, like, you know, once you got these stakeholders together, or I don't know if you maybe spoke to them one-on-one or as a group or whatever, what was that actually like? Were you apprehensive? Like, you know, what was it like to speak to stakeholders as a company?
Yeah. I think it really depends on the stakeholder, you know, and not every stakeholder in a location is going to have the same opinion. They're not going to have the same culture of how they want to communicate. So you just have to feel it out and show up and kind of like speak to people in their own love language, whatever that means to them. But overall, it's such a positive experience, I feel, because it's really about coming with curiosity, willingness to share, willingness to learn, and willingness to have your mind changed by hearing other people's perspectives. So yeah, I don't think it's something to be scared about, because even hard conversations can be really fruitful and lead you to surprising and interesting places.
Great, thanks. Yeah, anyone else want to chime in on that? No, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so when it comes to connecting with stakeholders, I think most important word is trust. And to build that trust, that takes time, first of all. But also you need to be sincere with your intentions and transparent. And you need to be there for the long term as well. So meeting with stakeholders is very often making sure that you have, you make use of the intermediates. You can have local NGOs, you can have farmer cooperatives, you can have suppliers or even customers. And then also parties like WF that also have a network across. And then in the end, it is also about agreeing on the common objective, right? So if that's what you have in mind, okay, what we want to achieve here is going to have a benefit for all. That's very important to be able to demonstrate right from the beginning when you are engaging with stakeholders, because if you don't do that, then you are constantly fighting against perceptions. So guess what? A farmer gets confronted with okay, an approach from WF and a big multinational company. Well, that's maybe not, that can come across as very, very frightening and frightening, but it's more like, okay, can we find a solution that the farmer is getting a better livelihood and is becoming more climate resilient, and at the same time we are achieving our objective, that is water security, and we are achieving the objective of WF, which is biodiversity and protect nature. And there is this win-win-win situation that you can often find in working together in collective action at the watershed level.
Thank you for that. Scott, you know, getting this win-win-win situation, it's not always, you know, it's not always discrete. It seems a little, it can sound a little messy, uncertain. And, you know, can you speak about times, you know, with AWS, I'm sure there are plenty of examples in the network, but speak about times where things didn't quite go to plan, and was that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing to realise with stakeholder engagement is that yes, it's important that you know who your stakeholders are, but also you are a stakeholder. So you are a stakeholder to someone else. You're a stakeholder to government, and government are mandated with managing the water resources. So you need to play your part with them. The other thing with stakeholder engagement is if you're inviting people in, you're asking their time. So you need to demonstrate relevance. You need to win them over and prove that kind of like you're not wasting their time. I think in terms of looking back to the government thing, so what is water stewardship? Well, water stewardship is basically a user-centric response to the shortcomings of integrated water resource management. If integrated water resource management worked, then water stewardship wouldn't exist. So integrated water resource management divides a stakeholder inclusive approach to catchment management. I'll give an example of kind of how these two kind of worlds need to come together. So a company in our network had built a factory. They built a factory several years previously in a developing economy, and they wanted to certify the standard. So as part of the process of getting approval for the factory, they had to get endorsements from the local utility, and had to get endorsements from the Basin Water Authority. Now for the utility, they're like, great, this big company is going to buy loads of water off me, like I need customers, fantastic. The Basin Water Authority, they're like, oh great, sort of water permits, kind of water users association, big company, they're going to take part, great, strengthen governance, etc., etc. So they get the company gets the license to build a factory. They build a factory. The problem with factories is they have walls. So they have walls, and walls have an inside and an outside. So there's an internal and there's an external. And a few years into kind of having the factory and being inside the walls and so on and so forth, they start thinking, well, actually, kind of like it's probably cheaper and less risky for us to just build a borehole. Because like we live in a developing economy, and that utility is failing. It's sort of like we can't rely our production on them. We kind of need to have a better way of approaching this sort of thing. So they built a borehole, so on and so forth. But at that point, they move slightly from being a stakeholder into being kind of internal. So they become self-reliant. They become withdrawn in a sense that they've moved inside the four walls. So how do I know this? So they asked to apply the standard. One of the first things they asked, one of the first requirements of the standard is stakeholder engagement. So we held a stakeholder session and we invited people into the walls, and it was awkward. It was quite awkward. Well, once people go over the fact I'm from Scotland, kind of thing, it moved into being awkward. There was palpable differences in terms of power and class kind of thing, in terms of kind of, and also kind of like the stakeholders don't necessarily like each other either. It's sort of like, so you think there's kind of, you're inviting these people and they're all going to get along and have the same views, and they don't. So it was quite an intense thing. But I'm going to talk about why kind of IWM and stewardship kind of need to come together kind of thing. So one of the things we learned from this stakeholder engagement is the relationship of the company kind of to governance kind of thing. So the World Bank had kind of developed kind of strong governance for this country, which is Ministry of Water, Basin Water Authorities, Water Users Association, etc., etc. One of the aspects of that is that the water permits funded the Water Users Association. So fundamentally, governance relies on people paying for water permits and kind of like strong functioning of governance. So the governance depends on the stakeholders playing their part, so taking part in kind of like multi-stakeholder management of water. In practice, because the company had gone behind its four walls, it really kind of withdrawn kind of thing, and it wasn't really engaging with anything. So in effect, the Water Users Association wasn't functioning because it wasn't the only company who wasn't engaging with it. So in practice, this Water Users Association was a 70-year-old guy on a push bike. So this 70-year-old guy on a push bike is responsible for kind of like the Water Users Association for kind of like a large municipality of about kind of like several 100,000 people. What was funny was that the guy on the push bike turned up with kind of 7 years worth of letters that he'd sent to this factory and 7 years of invoices for water permits of the Water Users Association. And that kind of like moved the conversation on quite a lot. I think it was symptomatic for me about the stakeholder engagement process, which is not just about you it's not just about you identifying people and bringing them in. It's sort of like, it's about you playing your part. Because if you're going to complain about kind of like the lack of kind of like viability of water resources in your place, well, kind of like you need to step up and be engaged in the processes and the governance and so on and so forth that's been put in place.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm going to pass it on to Jan, sort of on this, like, is it for you, why do you think it's worth embracing this sort of uncertainty? Like, what are the things that you've been able to achieve doing stakeholder engagement that you couldn't have otherwise?
Yeah, I think we can speak from experience in many parts of the world where we have started to engage with stakeholders on water, like in Guatemala. You mentioned already Pakistan. I can talk about things we do in Europe, for instance, for the Danube. We have the more than 10 years with WWF already, the Living Danube Partnership. And because the Danube, as an example, it is the most international river in the world because it flows across 10 different countries. So guess what, if you want to make interventions on a river that is crossing borders all the time, you need to make sure that everybody is on board and is in agreement with the interventions you want to do in terms of river restoration, floodplain restoration. And it goes up from, let's say, at the national level, engagement with the politicians, with the Ministry of the Environment, all the way down to the local association of anglers, because they use the river for fishing, and if you want to do something in the river, then all of a sudden they start to protest and, hey, what are you doing? So without collective action and stakeholder management in such a complex environment, you're not able to achieve much. And we've been able to do more than 9 projects already across the River Danube in 6 different countries, and that's already delivering a lot of water replenishment for our own objective, but also a lot of improvement for biodiversity and climate resilience.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? Yeah.
I have kind of a fun example of a cool win-win that came out of stakeholder engagement. So we have a cereal and granola bar plant that's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's in the Rio Grande watershed, and we were getting Alliance for Water Stewardship certification in 2021. And so as part of the stakeholder engagement, and then separately looking at the just kind of like what their opportunities were. They were like, maybe we should put an on-site water treatment equipment here so that we can clean the water before we put it back out into the municipality, take some of that burden off. But when they engaged the municipality, they were like, please do not do that. We love getting General Mills's water because it's full of sugar and cereal dust and little bits of oats. And that's what all of the bugs in the water treatment plant like to eat. So if you guys put that treatment equipment in, we'll have to buy molasses and other things to feed them, which is going to cost the municipality money. So through that stakeholder engagement, General Mills was able to identify we were providing a benefit to the watershed through the municipality, and then also save both of us money and time by not accidentally correcting something that was really working for them already.
Yeah, who would have thought stakeholders would ask you to not treat your water supply? But I think, yeah, these are sorts of unique insights that, as Margot mentioned, you could save you time and money that you would just not have without just talking to people. So zooming out, a final question before we open it up to the audience. You guys, you all run big programs across multiple countries that deploy stakeholder engagement. So at a macro view, what have you learned from running these programs? Go for it. Yeah.
The main thing is that it's difficult, but it can't be avoided. Like stakeholders will always come back to you. I think a good example is so we have certified sites all around the world. One company in the USA certified multiple sites. They had some challenging local stakeholder issues. They achieved certification, but we only really found out about the challenge in local stakeholder issues subsequently at the certification. The way that they had got round the stakeholder engagement aspects of our standard and stakeholder requirements is basically they just talk to people who like them. They're kind of like, which is kind of like, okay, it's one solution. So what's interesting is how we found out. It's sort of like, so this is a company in factories in North America, and we found out through questions being asked in the Swiss Parliament. Because what had happened was that the company, the local NGOs, local activists who were in contention with this company, Googled them, and then they Googled us, and then they Googled our donors. And then they got in touch with the Swiss government and said, why are you funding this organisation who's certifying this blue wash thing? So that kind of had quite significant problems for us, because we had to look into kind of the certification and so on and so forth. And what we found was that we previously worked through a network of independent auditors. And what we'd found was that the auditor was kind of like letting them away with it, in terms of kind of like, they had done stakeholder engagement, but they'd kind of done it not particularly well. And we had to overhaul our kind of our auditing system. So we had to overhaul our certification system, such we strengthened it and brought things in-house and so on and so forth. There was also repercussions for the company that went on and on and on, and ultimately ended up getting sold. But the moral of the story, the lesson there is that kind of like, don't talk to people who like you. So like, whatever you do, it's going to come back. And it's sort of like, how on earth do you end up with a facility in kind of like X location in the States being asked in the Swiss Parliament?
Well, just to encourage everybody, if you do talk to people who don't like you, eventually they might start liking you once you figure out ways that you can collaborate and develop mutual trust and respect. And I think that's kind of the key lesson that we continuously come back to. It's about curiosity, trust, building that long-term relationship, and being willing to learn and change your mind and see how things evolve. And then I think even though stakeholder engagement as a concept is kind of universally applicable no matter where you are, it's going to look really different in every place. So just being willing to show up with openness and not just go through a checklist, but to really build the relationships with people who can help you achieve mutual goals that you're working on together is I think the biggest takeaway for us about how to create meaningful impact.
Yeah, I would say two things. One is takes time. So invest time to it. It will not come the next day. So it's really taking an investment. And the other thing is, the second thing is do it on all levels. So it's not enough to do it at the corporate level, speak with all kinds of officials. It also important is to do it at the local level, at the factory level. Particularly if you look at the factories, so our bottling operations, yeah, they are focused very much within what is happening within the four walls of the factory. And they are very well in managing water every day, day in, day out, very efficient. But you need to look outside the walls of the factories, because behind the fence, that's also where the water source is and where your stakeholders are. And you need to do that on all levels, because those people are very relevant for your water supply. That takes courage, of course, from those people at that factory level that maybe are not used to talk to officials. But as soon as you have those relationships, you meet those people, can be within industry groups, can be with one-to-ones, then, and you build that trust, then you can have that experience that actually they know, when they know you more, they love you more, right?
Oh, sorry. I really like that. So we're going to open up the floor for audience Q&A. So if you have any questions, actually, no, I'll start online. Just checking if we have, no, okay. Let's go to the audience then. For questions for the panelists over here, I think. Oh, sorry.
My question is towards Margot and the gentleman. To have stakeholders, we need water in many areas. And you talked about Central Valley and the Rio Grande Basin, and seeing what has happened in the recent years. How are companies like General Mills going to engage these stakeholders to reduce the water footprint of how they produce almonds and other things, because the groundwater level is going down and we're having land degradation and land subsidence, especially in Central Valley. So just wanted to hear your side on it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you I love talking about almonds. So thank you for sharing. One of the ways that we're thinking about it is is kind of like trying to move away from only concern with efficiency in farming and think more about resilience, because water is a renewable resource. It cycles. We need it to be where it should be in the right quantity, the right quality at the right time. And so you're totally right that over withdrawing from groundwater is causing subsidence. There's aging infrastructure. There's a hurricane hitting Southern California right now, which hasn't happened since the 1930s. So climate change is also locally accelerating and disrupting those patterns. The way that General Mills is working on it at the moment is investing in regenerative agriculture, which can help farmers be more resilient to both drought and flood through soil health approaches, and also kind of invest in research that helps us understand to what extent and under what circumstances regenerative agriculture can influence those water outcomes. There's still a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of other work that needs to happen in that region and other regions. So that's one way that we're focusing on it. But again, we try to rely on those other stakeholders. And in California, we participate in the California Water Action Collaborative, or QAC, so that we can connect with other companies that are also working there, including Coca-Cola, that have other priorities, and figure out how together we can move that entire region in the right direction. So we have our focus on contribution, but want to see it in a larger context. And there's way more work to do. Cannot emphasize that enough, but that's where we've started at the moment.
Yeah, I can only add to that is that exactly that's how we think about it as well. It's about watershed health. So how do you create a sustainable water use in the context of a river basin? And first of all, there is still a lot of water wasted. So that's the first thing we need to address, was the water losses. And then indeed, when it comes to agriculture, that has a major impact in a lot of basins. I think there is a lot to gain in terms of regenerative agriculture practices, efficient water use. We have examples, for instance, from Europe in the Mediterranean for growing citrus fruits. So today, all the citrus fruits is grown with drip irrigation, and actually a lot of that is reclaimed wastewater. So when municipal wastewater is treated, that water is then used for irrigation for citrus fruit. So yes, those regions that have been suffering already for a long time from water stress or water scarcity, they have found innovative solutions to tackle those problems. Yeah.
Great. I think that was, yeah.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Jan, let me be direct because we've worked with Coca-Cola. My name is David. I'm from South Africa. Last year, if I remember very well, during the Nelson Mandela Day activities, you guys worked with the Department of Water and Sanitation, I beg your pardon, in the country. And in what you did, which I found to be quite interesting, there were a number of boreholes that you put up in a number of the rural schools in the country. But then this year, I can't even find a trace of Coca-Cola in number. I was a bit surprised as to what then would have happened, because the kind of impact that you did 2 years ago was massive. Now, my question is, in terms of your stakeholder engagement, is your project implementation on a once-off basis, or is it a 3 to 5 year plan? And if so, who are the people in the host countries where you have operations you talk to the extent that they can even guide where you need to implement those projects so that there is feasible impact? Because when you look at generally the state of water infrastructure in South Africa, the issue of poor maintenance is top of the list. I think you'd remember at one point Cape Town was sitting on 5 days of not having water. And at that time, we were all thinking with all these big corporates in South Africa, particularly those housed in Cape Town, they would come up with a plan, because some of them have technologies like I've learned with Coca-Cola, because you can actually take raw water, do a number of things before you actually then put your products for bottling and selling. And we couldn't find those guys. But then my question then is, with the impact that you have done previously, which we appreciate, where are you in the bigger scheme of things? And should there be some things in the horizon that we can expect? Because I know from a municipal context, that is where the issues are. The water boards are able to provide high quality water, which is safe for human consumption. But as it relates to your water leaks or water losses, that's where the challenges are. And I think the likes of Coca-Cola and other players can really come in handy. Thank you.
No, I fully agree with your point that maintaining interventions that you have created is very critical. So for us, that's also a very important part of the project, that we look at how is that project then maintained, because we claim the water benefit from those projects, right? We claim the amount of water that we have created with those WASH projects, for instance. But there is a very strict governance around it, that we can only claim that for maximum 10 years. And we need to monitor that infrastructure is in place. So every 2 years, somebody from Coke or a representative needs to visit the project to demonstrate that project is still maintained and is delivering the benefit that it is supposed to do. Now, of course, drilling boreholes, hand it over to the community and say, well, good luck with it, success, that's not going to work. I fully agree with you, but it's also important to agree with the stakeholders is, okay, what is then the follow-up on that? Can we organize it in a way that the local community is responsible for maintaining that water infrastructure? Is there funds available to cover for the maintenance costs, etc. So that's very important with the development of your projects, that you also think about the implementation, after the implementation phase, what is needed for maintaining it. Because otherwise, if within a couple of years those interventions are useless, then it's a waste of money. There is no impact for the local community. But there is also a big risk for us as a company, because yeah, we are just greenwashing, right? And we don't want that.
Question? This is Scott. Hi, Scott. My name is Rami, and I'm sustainability lead at WaterAid, and I think I'm still a credentialed AWS consultant. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you particularly about the perspective of and challenges of SMEs in stakeholder engagement, or don't have the influence of a global sort of supply chain or global buyer conglomerates, and how are they using the AWS standard? How are they getting their stakeholders engaged when they don't have that kind of influence?
Yeah. I'll try to think of the answer to this. SMEs is a term that covers a hell of a lot of scales. It's sort of like, there can be kind of like, so we work with a lot of kind of, we work in sectors that primarily their impact is realised via supply chains. So clothing companies don't own anything, kind of like the supermarkets don't own anything, sort of like the microelectronics companies don't really own anything. They buy a lot of stuff, and they buy from kind of other suppliers. And those suppliers can vary from like massive companies, but they're still national companies rather than international companies, to relatively small companies or smallholders or so on and so forth. And I think the issue of participation in water stewardship does come down to money. It does come down to kind of like, are you able to do this? Can you invest the time to do this in terms of paying your staff to kind of engage in this stuff? Do you have the money to do kind of the data collection, the stakeholder engagement, and the workshops and so on and so forth? So there's two aspects to this. First, the thing that everybody always struggles with in relation to the AWS standard is not the data collection, because it always goes to techie people and they love it. It's sort of like, it's the meeting people bit that they really don't like. So that's where kind of NGOs come in and kind of like support and so on and so forth. But it's a lot easier for a kind of transnational corporation to engage with NGOs and kind of like facilitation and so on and so forth than it is for a national company. And then what we see is that there's a gradation between kind of like, you call it an SME, but one of them is actually just like huge and one of them's not. And the one that's huge, it can take it on board. Our response to this is we have a thing called the Impact Accelerator Program, which is essentially kind of, we try and pull money from companies who work through water stewardship through supply chains. Because what happens with companies who work through supply chains is they tend to source from the same places. So clothing tends to come from Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, kind of Pakistan, etc. Microelectronics tends to come from China. Fruit tends to come from kind of Peru and Chile and Southern Africa, which means that there's clustering of smaller producers, which means that if the brands can put up a small amount of money, we're talking like 5,000 or whatever per site, then we can facilitate aggregated use of the standard. And that where that comes in terms of is shared data collection. So the data for the catchments collected across 30, 40, 50 sites rather than one big company, but also the stakeholder workshops. So the stakeholder workshops are kind of, the cost of them is brought down significantly. Cool. Did that actually answer your question? Yeah, the first one we've done is in Dhaka in Bangladesh with H&M and Primark suppliers, and we have about another 7 in kind of contract stage in various locations in South Asia, Asia Pacific, Southern Africa, and Latin America.
Is there a question over there? Yeah.
Turn on. It does.
It does.
I feel so powerful. So you all have made really excellent points, and some of the key words that I pulled out are things like power, making connection, and taking the time. And I think that's important to consider in this next question, which we've been talking about stakeholder engagement, and I'm really curious about rights holder engagement, and more specifically, the rights of Indigenous peoples and how your companies are thinking about that and those power imbalances with different stakeholders.
So I don't want to talk about something I don't know, so I'll keep it focused on what I do know about the way that we approach it in water. And if you'd like afterwards, I can connect you with my colleague who does focus on land rights. So that might get at some of your question as well. But thinking about water in particular, water is so complex and it's highly politicized. And then there are huge water imbalances for Indigenous folks and non. So I think that's definitely something that we consider as best as we can. And it's something that we have worked with some of our stakeholders to better understand how it's like present in specific watersheds that we're prioritizing. So using the same example of the Albuquerque plant in the Rio Grande watershed, for example, that plant is, if you know much about New Mexico, it's one of the places in the United States where Indigenous people are still living on their ancestral land. That's not commonly the case because of the history of how white immigrant communities have interacted with those communities. So New Mexico is a very unique place in that way. They have 19 pueblos and they have different governance structures. So one of our partners, the Nature Conservancy, implements a program in the upper watershed that we participate in with called the Rio Grande Water Fund, where they work to basically protect the watershed from the impact of wildfire. And one of the new initiatives that they've brought in over the past 2 years is having Indigenous people use traditional fire management and forest management knowledge to be the implementers of that project. So it's not just TNC coming in and doing all the work and kind of ignoring or stomping all over their kind of intellectual property in that way. So that's one step that a partner and a set of stakeholders that has been taken in a watershed where we work, but it's definitely a place that we could get smarter and learn more. So also I would welcome more resources about that if you have ones to share.
Yeah, there's not much that I can add because I'm also not very familiar with Indigenous rights, and it's very difficult for me to speak about that anyway.
I will add to that. So our standard was developed, is developed through a kind of lengthy process, a kind of global consultation. Took about 5 years to kind of get agreement, because what we were seeking was a standard which was applicable at any place, in any location, by any facility, and in any situation, which is ambitious, and arguably it remains ambitious, sort of whether or not that is the case. The one aspect of that consultation was our former partner in Australia, Water Stewardship Australia. They worked with native peoples to kind of review the development of the standard and to develop kind of like guidance kind of thing. But it's not my specialist area of expertise, and to echo the thing, if there is something that you can add to the conversation, then we would definitely be kind of open to kind of hearing stuff. My email address is Scott, SCOTT, @a4ws.org.
Yeah, thanks for that question, and also spoiler alert, that question of power will be a breakout discussion topic as well. So we hope to hear from you guys also on your thoughts on that. I think maybe one more question and then we'll call. Sure.
Hi, my name is Abba and I work for WWF. My question is mainly directed towards Jan and Marco. So we've heard very interesting examples from your engagement with local communities. But what I'm interested in knowing is how you're engaging with local regulatory bodies and public sector. And also, are you planning to, or are you already working on addressing local water governance issues, or thinking about entering into the realm of public policy advocacy, etc.?
Yeah, I think regulators are, of course, very important stakeholders to work with. The thing is that regulators, of course, have sometimes different objectives, and it's also important to bring them on right from the start. And sometimes you need platforms to create this common objective. Like I gave already the example of the Danube. You have the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube, which is then an excellent platform for regulators to work together on implementation of the River Basin Water Management Plan. But also when it comes to policy development, I think we can do more. And I can give you one example recently from the European Union. European Commission has launched recently the nature restoration law. And there was a big political debate ongoing, where particularly from the farmer side, there were a lot of objections. And on the initiative of WWF, they approached us also and said, can you speak out in favor of the nature restoration law? Because there is an important part in the nature restoration law that's about rivers, it's about water. And yes, we came out with a statement, and we gather more companies around it as well. And that's how we try to influence also the policymakers to come up with good water governments and water policies, because in the end, that all needs to work together in order to create this environment for water management.
One thing I would add to that is, or maybe re-emphasize, is the shared goals concept. I think something that regulators can do that serves the watershed really well is to help create those shared goals. And then what companies can do is say, yeah, we want to participate in helping to achieve that. We're not going to resist. And instead, we're going to try to figure out how to show up and all contribute to that common objective for the location. And that also kind of releases you from just saying, okay, here's like what little I think I can do, but more orienting towards a goal for a place, and then coming together to move forward with that. So I think that's another way that regulators can be engaged and be part of that story and kind of help set the tone and or set the stage for what's possible with collective action based on what's needed for the place, instead of just kind of like what the group thinks they can get together.
Yeah, I'm going to hijack this topic for kind of like a slightly different perspective. I'm mainly talking to the water stewardship community on this, and the conversation is about how do you engage the public sector. And I think the elephant in the room in the water stewardship landscape is that the public sector are nowhere. It's sort of like, and why they nowhere? Well, because we haven't convinced them. It's sort of like we haven't demonstrated relevance to them. It's sort of like, to go back to the stakeholder engagement thing, I think there's small pockets of kind of like really good work that have kind of connected with the public sector in a strong way, but we also, I think we fundamentally need to demonstrate relevance. And this feeds back into a lot of the work that collectively the community are doing around, say, collective action, because it's sort of like, how do you demonstrate relevance? Well, you do things. So what we're trying to do is to focus the resources of the community on specific places and gathering the strength of the community to focus on those places and evidence that this stuff actually works. And then from there, we can then move into having a conversation about improving regulation, incentivizing kind of like X, Y, and Z through policy.
All right, thanks very much to the panel. Really appreciate it. And a few takeaways that I took were talk to people who don't like you. Building trust takes time, and remembering that you are also, as a company, you are also a stakeholder and playing your role as a stakeholder in that shared responsibility. So a round of applause for our panel. Thanks again. Yeah, thanks. So we're going to move into some breakout discussions, and I'm appreciative that this room is split into tables. So at your tables, we've got some prompts over here. The questions are, what do you think the role, I mean, I know we've discussed it, but like personally, what do you think the role of companies are in stakeholder engagement? As was, discussed, how do you approach stakeholders that don't like you, in quotation marks? How do you motivate people to invest in stakeholder engagement when the benefits, when you think about corporates, there's no KPIs or like metrics associated with stakeholder engagement in a conventional sense. So how do you motivate people to invest in this within your company? How do you address, social/power dynamics? And then, in a big basin with lots of different groups, how do you assess who to engage? So we'll take about 20 minutes to discuss that, and then we'll hopefully have some time for some quick report outs at various tables. Thanks again. And those of you online, I believe we're breaking you out into Zoom breakout rooms as well. Hi. Hi, everyone. We're gonna, oh, sorry, that's loud. We're gonna have 5 more minutes left for the discussion and then some report outs for tables. Thanks, 5 minutes. Okay, thanks everyone. So I think time's up for breakout discussions. We have a little bit of time for report outs, and we're actually going to start online because the online group have also been doing a few breakout groups. So yeah, could we go ahead with the waiting? Oh, can whoever's online to start, can they start the camera, please? And
my camera isn't wanting to work.
no problem. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your discussion.
Yeah, sure. So it's it's working now. It's Rowan West Hensel here. I'm a senior specialist at WRAP, Waste and Resources Action Programme, and we discussed most of the questions. So in terms of the role of companies, we talked about the importance of their leadership, their leverage and influence across the supply chain, being that mouthpiece for what they're doing for innovation, also the role of businesses in investing in things like collective action. They can also help create efficiencies in the supply chain and really importantly, act as advocates for better water governance with governments because they have that really kind of strong voice. In terms of working with organisations that don't like you, we talked about how safe spaces are really important for creating that pre-competitive working across businesses, but also across different power dynamics. You know, really trying to understand different perspectives and the context for why those feelings might be there, and identifying common ground and finding those kind of benefits, the co-benefits of working together. And linked to that in terms of those benefits and how we motivate organisations when benefits aren't clear. Again, it's very much about the return on investment of working together in a space, really looking at that kind of the common benefits that you achieve when you work together that you can't achieve alone. And we know that that's so important on water. And then in terms of the sort of social power dynamics, again, creating that safe space for those stakeholders to have equity and to have all of them to have a voice and to have influence over creating things like shared action plans that drive change. So I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rowan. And anyone in the room want to report out on their discussion? All right. Well, oh, good. Thanks. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Laura Weintraub with Limnotech. A couple thoughts we shared here as far as role of companies and stakeholder engagement. I think there's a responsibility to learn, and so much education can happen through these one-on-one or small group conversations. And it's been exciting to see light bulbs go off when someone that works in a plant or facility shakes hands with someone in the community they never really thought about before. And also really learning where that water comes from and where it goes, because most companies might come into the situation thinking the water just comes out of the tap. As far as approach to stakeholders who maybe don't like you, I think there's a sense of vulnerability that comes in here, and just giving the message that, hey, we're all in this as a common issue that we're trying to solve together, and not being too scared to just expose yourself a little bit and realize, hey, nobody's perfect, but let's just start having that conversation. And then I'll just comment on the assessing who to engage. We work with a lot of companies that do stakeholder mapping and have to narrow down where do you start. Some things we do is first we cast a wide net and look at a really large group of stakeholders, many different sectors. We ask companies, do they have existing relationships, either positive or potentially negative, that we want to be aware of as we're working through this list, and think about how those stakeholders may influence or help support you in positive ways. And making sure that that list, it doesn't have to be long to start, but a diverse list of stakeholders is important. Thinking about different sectors, water suppliers, nonprofits, really thinking about a small mix, and then relationships can build from there. And I think another thing is kind of going on that stakeholders that don't like you. It's okay to avoid those hot spots or trigger points. And that's perfectly fine to get started in stakeholder engagement. And I think just looking at that voluntary aspect of water stewardship and starting with a more positive direction can kind of help maybe calm some fears as those conversations get started.
Great, thanks very much. All right, we've got 2 minutes left. So if we've got a hand over here. Have the last word.
My name is Peter Reese. I'm with Search for Water, and I think that the main theme that we came away with for most of these questions is ensuring that you're listening and speaking in a language that is understood. So if you're talking to folks that care about finance, you put things into the financial terms. If you talk to people who care about some other aspect of water, then you're talking to them at that level. So it's about really not speaking at, but it's listening to and then translating into that community or that language. Anything to add? I think that was it. Thank you.
Perfect. That's a great note to end on, and you all get 1 minute back. So thanks, everyone.